Welcome to my channel, Crimson Inquiry.
It was in the chill twilight of an October evening when the strange affair of the whisper beneath the black lace first intruded upon our quiet routine at Baker Street. The fire crackled cheerily in the grate, fighting back the damp mist that clung to the window panes, and Holmes sat opposite me in his habitual armchair, the thin grey coils of tobacco smoke wreathing about his hawk-like features. His eyes, half closed, were fixed not upon me but upon the curling smoke, as though divining some hidden pattern in its motion. Our peace was disturbed by the sudden opening of the door, and Mrs. Hudson's troubled voice announced a visitor. A lady stepped forward, tall, veiled, and visibly shaken. Her gloved hands trembled as she clutched a small parcel wrapped in black silk. Holmes rose with his characteristic grace. "Pray, madam, be seated," he said. "You bring with you the mark of haste and of dread. I perceive that your journey here was neither short nor uneventful." The woman hesitated. You know who I am?" she asked in a low voice, the accent faintly refined yet quivering with emotion. "I know," said Holmes quietly, "that you came from Hanover Square, that you left your residence in such haste that you forgot to replace your wedding ring, and that the matter which brings you here is not of theft or fraud, but of death." At this the lady gasped and lowered her veil. "You are right, Mr. Holmes," she whispered. "There has been death, though no one will yet call it murder." Watson leaned forward. "Then you must tell us everything, madam." "Begin at the beginning." She drew in a deep breath. "My name is Lady Eugenia Harcourt. My husband, Colonel Harcourt, was found lifeless 3 nights ago in his study. The cause, they say, was heart failure. But there was something dreadful I cannot explain. And the police will hear none of it." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Proceed." "The Colonel had been writing a letter that night," Lady Harcourt continued. "It was addressed to me, yet sealed and placed upon his desk. When I found him, the fire had nearly consumed the paper. Only one corner remained, blackened but legible." She unwrapped the parcel and placed the charred fragment upon the table. Holmes bent over it, the lamplight catching the angular planes of his face. On the brittle paper, a few words were still discernible. "Beware the whisper beneath the black lace." A profound silence filled the room. Holmes's fingers brushed lightly over the edges of the fragment. "Watson," he murmured, "you may mark this as one of those rare occasions when death whispers more than the living dare to speak." Holmes remained motionless for several moments. The charred fragment balanced delicately between his long, slender fingers. The faint hiss of the fire was the only sound in the room, save for the rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock. Then, with a quiet exhalation, he laid the paper upon the table and turned his piercing gaze upon Lady Harcourt. "Tell me, madam," he said softly, "what was your husband's condition of mind in the days preceding his death?" She hesitated. "He was troubled, Mr. Holmes. The Colonel was a man of discipline, measured, restrained. But for a fortnight before that dreadful night, he grew restless, easily startled. Twice I found him standing by the window after midnight, staring into the fog as though expecting someone. Did he speak of any fear or apprehension?" "Only once. He said, quite suddenly, 'There are things a man cannot bury, Eugenia, no matter how deep he digs.' When I pressed him, he smiled it off as nonsense." Holmes steepled his fingers. "Remarkable. And this letter, when you found it, was it sealed in his handwriting?" "Yes, the seal was his own, his family crest, a raven in flight, but it was half melted by the fire." Holmes nodded absently, his mind already weaving unseen threads. "And who discovered the body?" "I did," she replied, her voice tightening. He was seated at his desk, his head resting upon his arm. The servants had heard nothing. "The physician declared it heart failure, yet—" She faltered, glancing toward the smoldered paper. The look upon his face, Mr. Holmes, it was not peace. It was terror. Holmes rose abruptly and crossed to the window. He stood there for a moment, gazing out into the fog that rolled over Baker Street, his silhouette cut sharp against the pale lamplight. Then he turned back, his expression keen, almost alight with some inward fire. "You say he was writing to you at the time of his death. That implies foreknowledge, an expectation that something might occur that night. Watson, what inference do you draw from that?" I considered. "That he anticipated danger, perhaps even death. But surely, if he feared for his life, he would have summoned the authorities, or at least confided in his wife." "Just so," Holmes murmured. Yet he did neither. Instead, he chose to commit a cryptic warning to paper, a warning that ends in a most singular phrase, "beneath the black lace." Tell me, Lady Harcourt, does that expression mean anything to you? She shook her head. Nothing save that I once owned a lace shawl of black, an heirloom, but it was lost months ago. I thought little of it. Holmes's eyes brightened almost imperceptibly. Lost? Under what circumstances? I had worn it to the Duchess of Marlborough's reception in Hanover Square. When I returned home, it was gone. I presumed it had fallen somewhere along the carriage route. Holmes smiled faintly. Watson, how often do you find that what a lady loses and what a man fears are two halves of the same coin? I made no reply, for he had already turned to Lady Harcourt again. Madam, I will ask you to retain every detail of that evening in your memory. What guests were present at this reception? There were many. The Duke and Duchess, Sir Alistair Vaughan, Lady Pendry, and Mr. Felix Rivington, among others. My husband attended as well, though briefly. Holmes's brows lifted. Rivington, you say? The art dealer. Yes, he is an acquaintance of my husband's, from his military years in India. They spoke for some time that night, though rather tensely, I thought. Indeed, said Holmes quietly. And after the Colonel's death, has Mr. Rivington called upon you? A faint shiver passed over her. Yes, 2 days after the funeral. He came to express his condolences, but his questions were strange. He asked if the Colonel had left behind any papers of a personal nature, and whether I intended to remain at Harcourt House. When I asked his meaning, he grew flustered and left abruptly. Holmes's expression hardened. A man who inquires after another's papers seldom does so from mere sentiment. Watson, make a note of Mr. Felix Rivington, late of India, dealer in art and curiosities. I opened my notebook obediently, feeling the familiar thrill of the chase stirring within me. Holmes' manner had grown alert and purposeful, his every movement now precise, economical, alive with calculation. Lady Harcourt, he said, you will do me the kindness of returning home and behaving, as far as possible, in your usual manner. If Mr. Rivington calls again, receive him courteously. Say nothing of your visit here, and above all, do not destroy or alter anything in the Colonel's study. Watson and I will call upon you tomorrow before luncheon. But, Mr. Holmes, if there is danger— He lifted a hand gently. Madam, you may rest assured that danger is the air I breathe. Should any harm threaten you, it will have to pass through me first. The lady rose, her composure wavering only slightly. She thanked us, left a brief note of address, and departed, her footsteps fading into the rain-slicked street below. When the door had closed behind her, Holmes stood for a long moment staring at the dying embers in the grate. Then, quite suddenly, he turned to me with that familiar gleam that always presaged action. Watson, you recall the affair of the Abbey Grange? Perfectly, I said, somewhat startled by the abrupt shift. There, too, we encountered a death conveniently labelled as natural. But, as I observed then and shall again now, nature seldom acts with such narrative neatness. No, my dear fellow. Colonel Harcourt's heart ceased to beat, but not through the will of Providence. There is artifice here. Clever, deliberate artifice. He paced the length of the room, hands clasped behind his back. A lost shawl, a cryptic letter, a frightened wife, and a dealer in Indian curiosities, all linked by the whisper of black lace. It is an elegant puzzle, Watson. Elegant and deadly, I ventured. You believe Rivington to be involved? I believe him to be a thread, not yet the fabric. But tug the right thread, and the whole tapestry comes undone. He halted suddenly beside the table where the burnt fragment lay. Look at it, Watson. The Colonel wrote this by lamplight, moments before his death. The ink is blotted irregularly, suggesting haste or fear. Yet note this margin, untouched by the fire. Someone attempted to burn it, but not completely. Why? Because they were interrupted. Therefore, whoever found the Colonel first was not Lady Harcourt. Good heavens, Holmes. Then the murderer. Precisely. The murderer sought to destroy the evidence, but was forestalled. Lady Harcourt entered too soon. Hence only a portion of the message was consumed. He smiled grimly, his eyes flashing with that fierce delight only a worthy riddle could bring. Tomorrow we go to Hanover Square. I have a strong suspicion that beneath the Colonel's elegant residence, among the ash of his last letter, there lies a whisper indeed, one that speaks in the language of deceit. He tapped the paper thoughtfully. And, Watson, he added almost as an afterthought, bring your revolver. My revolver! I exclaimed. Yes, a whisper is a curious thing. It can travel through lace, through air, even through the crack of a pistol. He smiled then, cold, analytical and utterly certain, and turned once more to the fire. The flames reflected like tiny stars in his keen grey eyes. Morning found Baker Street veiled in a pale fog that blurred the outlines of the city into a grey watercolour. I awoke to the familiar rustle of newspapers and the faint clink of glass against porcelain. Holmes sat at the breakfast table, his cup untouched. The morning edition of the Times spread before him, though his eyes seemed to read not the print, but the patterns that hid behind it. "Watson," he said without looking up, "the inquest into Colonel Harcourt's death was held quietly yesterday evening. Cause officially recorded. Heart failure with no suspicious circumstances." I set down my cup. "That seems hasty." "Indeed. Lestrade presided, I gather, though he did not trouble himself to communicate with me. No doubt he will call the case satisfactorily concluded. An unfortunate but unremarkable demise." Holmes folded the paper neatly and reached for his hat. "We, however, shall not be so easily lulled. Come, my dear fellow, the carriage waits." Within the hour we were making our way through the fog-drenched streets toward Hanover Square. The air smelled faintly of rain and horses, the rhythmic clatter of hooves echoing off the facades of tall Georgian houses. Holmes was unusually silent during the journey, save for an occasional muttered observation about the quarter's recent changes, details that I, in my simplicity, could scarcely perceive. When at last we arrived at Harcourt House, the place bore the unmistakable melancholy of a household still in mourning. Black ribbons adorned the iron gate. The windows were draped in heavy crape. A butler admitted us with quiet solemnity, and we were shown into the late Colonel's study, a room that at once spoke of order, discipline and concealed secrets. Holmes paused upon the threshold, his eyes darting rapidly from one object to another, taking in the dark mahogany desk, the regimented rows of books, the faint trace of cigar smoke that lingered in the air. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "This is not the disarray of sudden death. The scene has been curated, tidied, perhaps even rehearsed. Lady Harcourt entered then, dressed in black silk, her composure steadier than before. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming. I have kept the study exactly as it was." Holmes inclined his head. "You have done well. Now, if you please, I must examine everything. Watson, assist me by noting any object that seems recently displaced." For nearly half an hour he moved about the room with the noiseless precision of a cat, touching nothing, yet observing all. He bent low over the writing desk, studied the ashtray, then examined a set of framed photographs upon the mantel. "Curious," he murmured at last. "Tell me, Lady Harcourt, did your husband habitually smoke cigars?" "Occasionally," she said. "He preferred the Indian variety, something he called a trichinopoly." Holmes smiled faintly. "Ah, yes, the thick, pungent type favoured by military men. And yet these ashes are from cigarettes, Turkish by the look and odour of them. Note the fine texture, Watson. See how they cling together in threads rather than crumble." I bent to look and nodded. "You're right. These could not have come from a cigar." "Precisely. Therefore, we may infer that the Colonel's last visitor was not of his own habits. A detail, Watson, small but significant." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the bookshelves now. "Lady Harcourt, may I trouble you to tell me who last entered this room after your husband's death?" "Only the physician, the constable, and Mr. Rivington, when he came to pay his respects." Holmes's tone remained calm, but his eyes gleamed. "And when did Mr. Rivington arrive?" "The morning after. I was still too distraught to receive him formally, but he insisted on seeing me. I met him here in this very room." Holmes moved toward the curtains that hung beside the window. He pinched a fold of fabric between his fingers and examined it closely. Then, with a sudden movement, he reached behind the curtain and drew forth something small and glimmering. It was a delicate brooch, a black oval set in silver filigree, with a few charred threads of lace still clinging to its clasp. "Lady Harcourt," said Holmes quietly, "does this belong to you?" She gasped. "Yes! It was part of the shawl I told you of, the one I lost at the Duchess's reception." "How in heaven's name did it come here?" "That, madam," Holmes replied, "is precisely the question." He placed the brooch carefully upon the desk and leaned close to study it. "Watson, note that the clasp is broken and these threads are slightly singed. The object has been exposed to heat, though not enough to destroy it. One might surmise it was near a flame, perhaps the same flame that half consumed the Colonel's letter. The lady pressed a hand to her mouth. "You mean my Shaw was here?" But how could that be? Holmes did not answer immediately. He had turned his attention to a small cabinet near the fireplace. Its drawers were filled with correspondence, military reports, and in the lowest compartment a locked metal box. Producing a small penknife, he deftly pried it open. Inside lay several yellowed letters bound with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, distinctly feminine. Holmes unfolded one carefully and read a few lines under his breath. Then he replaced it, his expression unreadable. "Lady Harcourt," he said, "I shall ask you one last question. Did your husband ever speak to you of a woman named Isabella March?" Her eyes widened. "No, the name means nothing to me." Holmes nodded slightly, though I saw the muscles of his jaw tighten. "Then it is best you do not distress yourself with conjecture. These papers will, I believe, illuminate much, but their meaning is not yet ripe for disclosure." He replaced the letters, closed the box, and rose. "Come, Watson. We have seen all we may for the present. There is more to be learned elsewhere." Outside, the fog had thickened to a pearly haze. We walked for some distance in silence, before I could no longer restrain my curiosity. "Holmes, surely you must explain." The brooch, the cigarette ash, the letters. What connection can there be? He smiled slightly, as though amused by my impatience. "Each fact, my dear Watson, is but a note in the melody. The harmony is yet to be heard. But consider this. A woman's lost shawl reappears in the chamber of her dead husband. A dealer in Indian curiosities calls upon her uninvited, seeking papers. And among those papers lies correspondence from another woman entirely." He hailed a cab with his usual abruptness. "We go now to Burlington Street, to Mr. Felix Rivington's establishment. I have a fancy that our art dealer will find it difficult to maintain his composure when I ask him what he knows of black lace." The shop in question was a narrow building with dusty windows, crowded with Eastern artifacts. Brass lamps, ivory carvings, faded tapestries. A bell tinkled as we entered. Behind the counter stood a tall man of perhaps 40, well-dressed with a neatly trimmed beard and quick, nervous eyes. "Mr. Rivington?" Holmes asked pleasantly. The man inclined his head. "At your service. My name is Sherlock Holmes. You were acquainted with the late Colonel Harcourt, I believe." The man's composure faltered for an instant, then returned. "Indeed, though only as a business acquaintance. His death was most unfortunate." "Quite so," said Holmes. "And yet one might almost call it timely, for I understand certain transactions between you and the Colonel were nearing their close. A matter of Indian antiquities, perhaps." Rivington stiffened. "I fail to see how that concerns you." "Ah, but it does," Holmes replied smoothly, "especially when one of those curiosities took the form of a lady's shawl, black lace of delicate make, and last seen upon your premises." For the briefest moment, the man's colour drained. Then he recovered with a tight smile. "You are mistaken. I deal in no such trifles." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Then perhaps you will not object if I send for Inspector Lestrade and allow him to verify the matter himself." Rivington's jaw clenched. He glanced toward the back room, then back at Holmes. "That will not be necessary. Perhaps we might speak privately." Holmes's voice was mild. "Oh, I think not. Watson here is my chronicler, and on occasion my conscience. Proceed, sir." Rivington hesitated, his fingers drumming upon the counter. "Very well," he said at last, his voice low. "But I warn you, Mr. Holmes, there are things buried in this affair that would do no good to see the light." Holmes's expression did not change. "Then, Mr. Rivington, you and I are in perfect agreement, for I intend to unearth them all the same." Rivington's words hung in the air like smoke, curling through the silence that followed. Holmes regarded him with the patient stillness of a cat, watching a mouse hesitate before a trap. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Holmes leaned slightly against the counter, his tone almost conversational. "My dear sir, you speak of buried things. But the ground, you see, is soft after rain. It yields easily to a practiced hand. Why not spare yourself the trouble, and tell us at once what lies beneath?" Rivington's lips tightened. His fingers twisted the edge of his cuff, betraying an unease his composed face sought to conceal. "You mistake my meaning, Mr. Holmes. The Colonel's death was tragic, yes, but it concerns matters of honor, not crime. I would prefer not to involve the lady further. Holmes's eyes flicked toward a small brass elephant perched upon the shelf behind the counter. "Honor," he repeated softly, "is a word much abused in my experience." "Pray tell me, Mr. Rivington, did your sense of honor extend to returning Lady Harcourt's shawl when you found it among your possessions?" The man froze. "I don't know what you mean." Holmes moved closer, his voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous calm. "Come now. A black lace shawl singed at the edges. You saw it last, did you not? At the Duchess of Marlborough's reception. A trivial trinket, perhaps, but it has the unpleasant habit of reappearing in the company of corpses." The dealer's composure cracked. He swallowed hard, his gaze darting toward the curtained doorway that led to the back of the shop. "If you knew what that lace meant, you would not speak so lightly," he muttered. "Enlighten me," Holmes replied, his tone silk over steel. Rivington hesitated. Then, as though resigning himself to inevitability, gestured for us to follow. "This way." He led us through the narrow passage to a small back room, dimly lit and crowded with crates, artifacts, and the faint, cloying scent of sandalwood. From a drawer in a writing desk, he withdrew a folded length of charred fabric, black lace, its intricate weave marred by patches of darkened ash, Lady Harcourt's missing shawl. Rivington spread it upon the desk with something like reverence. "It came into my possession 3 nights before the Colonel's death," he said. "A messenger brought it, an Indian servant I had never seen before. He claimed it was sent by the Colonel himself, as collateral for an unpaid debt. I thought it odd, for I knew Harcourt to be a man of means. Still, I held it, expecting him to call. He never did." Holmes examined the lace closely, lifting a section toward the light. "Strange," he murmured. "The burn marks are irregular, concentrated near the center rather than the edges, as though something hot had been pressed into it." He looked up sharply. "What did you do with it after you received it?" "I kept it locked in that drawer. But the night before the Colonel's death, someone broke in." "Broke in?" "Yes, the window was forced. Only that drawer had been disturbed. Yet nothing was taken." Rivington's voice grew quieter. "The next morning the Colonel was dead." Holmes paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back, his face grave with thought. "You say the messenger was Indian. Can you describe him? Medium height, dark complexion, wearing European dress?" He spoke little, but his accent was unmistakable. Holmes nodded, his mind already leagues ahead. "India," he murmured, "again and again, India. The Colonel's service, the cigars, the dealer, the messenger. There is a pattern here, Watson, but the weave is not yet clear." I glanced at Rivington. "And you have no idea what business tied you and the Colonel together?" Rivington hesitated. "It was an old matter, a relic he brought back from the campaign in Bengal, a carved idol of obsidian. He claimed it was cursed nonsense, but he never parted with it. Recently he spoke of destroying it." Holmes stopped mid-step. "Destroying it? Did he say why?" "He mentioned that the idol had brought misfortune to every man who possessed it." He laughed as he said it, but there was fear in his eyes. Holmes turned sharply to me. "Watson, do you recall the phrase on the Colonel's letter? 'Beware the whisper beneath the black lace.' Suppose, for argument's sake, that the whisper is not metaphorical but literal, something concealed within the lace itself. A message, perhaps, or a residue." He took the shawl once more and held it near the lamp. Then from his pocket he produced a small lens. As he examined the fibers, I saw a subtle shift in his expression, a glimmer of revelation. "There is a residue," he said softly, "a fine dust like ash but metallic. Gold perhaps, or more likely powdered pigment." He looked up, his gaze piercing. "This lace was not burned by accident. It was used to conceal or transfer something." Rivington paled. "Then the Colonel. He must have discovered it." "Precisely," Holmes said. "He uncovered the secret hidden within his wife's shawl, perhaps one meant not for him but for another. And that discovery cost him his life." The dealer's face went ashen. "You think I—" Holmes raised a hand. "No, Mr. Rivington. I think you are a pawn, perhaps a reluctant one, in a far older game. Tell me, did you show this lace to anyone before we arrived?" "No one," Rivington said quickly. "I swear it." "Good, then we still have the advantage of surprise." He folded the shawl carefully and handed it to me. "Watson, keep this safe. It may yet speak more than any living witness." We left Rivington's shop as dusk fell across the city, the gaslights flickering to life along the misty street. Holmes walked swiftly, his eyes darting restlessly from shadow to shadow. "Holmes," I said, struggling to match his pace, "you believe this shawl conceals more than a clue. It may be part of the crime itself." He gave a curt nod. "There is design in every thread, my dear fellow." The Colonel's last words suggest that he uncovered something whispered, hidden beneath lace and civility. And whoever wove that secret feared exposure enough to silence him. We turned onto Oxford Street, where the fog thickened like smoke. Holmes stopped abruptly, his hand on my arm. "Do not look behind you, Watson, but we are being followed." My heart quickened. Followed? By whom? I cannot yet say, but the rhythm of those footsteps, light, measured, belongs not to a common thief. "Keep walking." We proceeded for another block, our unseen companion maintaining the same distance. At last Holmes turned suddenly into a narrow alley, pulling me close against the wall. A moment later, a shadow passed the mouth of the alley. A tall figure, cloaked and hat-brimmed low. The faint glow of a cigar flared in the mist, then vanished. Holmes waited until the sound of footsteps receded. "You see, Watson, our little inquiry has stirred the wasps. Someone knows we have the lace, and they mean to retrieve it." He stepped back into the street, his expression grimly satisfied. "Good. It confirms the game's value. Let us hasten back to Baker Street. There is an experiment I wish to conduct, and before the night is over, I believe this lace will whisper its secret to me." He said no more, but his stride lengthened with purpose, the fog swallowing us as we made our way home through the restless pulse of London, unaware that the whisper we pursued was already winding closer, dark, deliberate, and deadly. We reached Baker Street under the weight of deepening night. The fog clung to our coats as we entered the familiar warmth of our sitting room, where the fire burned low and the faint scent of tobacco lingered in the air. Holmes wasted no time. He shed his overcoat, rolled up his sleeves, and placed the folded black lace upon the table beneath the bright glow of the lamp. "Watson," he said briskly, "fetch my chemical case. There is something curious about this residue I observed earlier. I would wager it hides a language we are meant to read." I did as he asked, setting before him the small wooden case of vials and glass droppers he used in such experiments. Holmes selected one marked nitrate of silver, another hydrochloric acid, and then with delicate precision applied a thin solution to the charred fabric. The reaction was almost immediate. A faint shimmer spread across the lace, and as he leaned closer I saw it too, a faint network of lines forming what appeared to be letters, or fragments of them. "Good heavens," I murmured. "Is that ink?" "Not ink," Holmes replied softly. "Gold chloride, perhaps, used in certain forms of secret writing. Ingenious, Watson. The black lace was not merely a garment, it was the medium for a message. The faintest outlines of words began to emerge, written along the threads in a delicate, looping script. "Consignment arrives Thursday. Deliver by hand. The idol must not pass to a—" The sentence ended abruptly where the fabric had burned away. Holmes read it twice, his lips moving silently, then straightened with a sharp gleam in his eye. "The idol. You recall Rivington's confession of an obsidian relic from Bengal. Here, Watson, we have our connection, and I suspect the motive for murder." "You mean," I said, "the Colonel's death was tied to this consignment?" "Unquestionably. Consider the sequence of events. The Colonel receives the shawl, perhaps unwittingly, bearing this hidden instruction. He deciphers part of it and realizes that he has stumbled into a plot. The sender, fearing exposure, silences him. The letter he wrote to his wife was his last effort to warn her, or perhaps to preserve the evidence. Hence his cryptic phrase, 'Beware the whisper beneath the black lace.'" Holmes turned the fabric again beneath the light, his gaze intent. "It is most instructive that the message refers to R. Rivington, no doubt, but not as recipient. I suspect the idol was meant for another hand, and Rivington's involvement was peripheral. Someone else gave the order. Someone higher in this chain." He moved to his desk, his mind evidently racing ahead of his words. "Now, Watson, let us think. A smuggled idol, secret correspondence written in invisible gold, and a delivery planned for Thursday. What day is it?" "Wednesday," I said. "Precisely. Then the consignment is due within 24 hours. Our murderer moves still and moves quickly." He leaned back, tapping his fingertips together. "The idol is our key. Rivington said it brought misfortune to every man who possessed it. Nonsense, of course, but superstitions often cloak more material concerns. It was likely a stolen artifact, one tied to political or financial intrigue in India. I could not help remarking, "Holmes, this case grows darker by the hour. If the Colonel died for uncovering such a secret, are we not courting similar danger?" He smiled faintly. "My dear fellow, danger is the seasoning that makes the feast of reason palatable. Besides, our adversary does not yet know the extent of our knowledge. That will soon change." He turned once more to the table and lifted the lace with his gloved fingers. "This, Watson, I shall entrust to you for safekeeping tonight. But before you hide it, look here." He pointed to a faint mark near the corner, a pressed insignia almost invisible. Through the magnifying lens I discerned the outline of a crest, a serpent coiled about a dagger. Holmes's expression hardened. "That emblem is no stranger to me. It belongs to a certain clandestine order that once operated in Calcutta, the Brotherhood of the Serpent, smugglers, blackmailers, and assassins operating under the guise of merchants. Their influence dwindled years ago, yet a few embers, it seems, still smoulder in London." He began pacing, speaking half to himself. "A consignment arriving under their mark. A colonel of the British Army, who once fought against their conspiracies. A relic from Bengal carrying a curse, or more likely a code. And now, murder." I sat in uneasy silence, the fire's glow casting long shadows against the walls. At last, Holmes stopped abruptly. "Watson, we must not waste a moment. Tomorrow morning we go to the docks. The message speaks of a consignment arriving Thursday." "We shall be there when it does," I agreed, though inwardly I felt a growing tension, as though unseen eyes already watched our every move. The night passed restlessly. I woke more than once to the creak of the floorboards below, and the faint scratch of Holmes's pen as he worked through the small hours. When dawn broke, he was still at the table, the morning light painting his sharp features in pale silver. He looked up briefly. "Ah, Watson, you're awake. I trust you slept well enough to carry a revolver with steady hand." "Holmes, do you anticipate violence?" He smiled thinly. "Only from those who prefer their secrets unspoken. Now let us make haste. There is fog on the river, a most accommodating cover. We left Baker Street shortly after 8. The morning air was thick and damp, the kind that swallowed sound. By cab we made our way toward the eastern docks, where the river lay like dull metal beneath the mist. Holmes moved with purposeful silence, scanning the crowd with that uncanny precision that made him seem to read the very air for intention. Near the warehouse district, he stopped abruptly. "There," he said softly, pointing toward a small cargo office marked with the name Harrow & Sons Shipping Company. A pair of stevedores were unloading crates, while a clerk checked names off a ledger. Holmes adjusted his hat and strode forward. Inside, the air smelled of sea salt and oil. Holmes produced one of his cards and addressed the clerk with practiced authority. "Mr. Harrow, I believe. I am from the Home Office investigating a consignment scheduled for today, marked with this crest." He drew from his pocket a small sketch of the serpent and dagger. The clerk frowned. "That came through this morning, sir. Strange shipment. No manifest, prepaid instructions to hold for collection by a man named—" He glanced at the ledger. "Mr. R. March." Holmes' eyes flashed. "March," he repeated softly. "The same surname as the woman whose letters we found in Harcourt's study. Curious symmetry, Watson, don't you think?" He leaned toward the clerk. "And where is this crate now?" "Warehouse 3, sir. Waiting to be claimed." Holmes's lips curved into that faint predatory smile I knew too well. "Excellent. Then we shall wait with it." We followed the man to a cavernous storage hall filled with rows of wooden crates. One bore the serpent crest, its lid sealed with heavy wax. Holmes examined it carefully, then crouched beside it, tracing the mark with his finger. "It is genuine," he whispered. "We are at the heart of the web now, Watson. The whisper beneath the black lace has led us to its voice, and I fear it will not remain silent for long." As he spoke, a faint echo stirred from the far end of the warehouse, a footstep, soft and deliberate. Holmes rose at once, his hand brushing the revolver hidden beneath his coat. "Steady, Watson," he murmured. "So it seems our company has arrived earlier than expected." The echoing footstep drew nearer, measured and calm, betraying neither haste nor hesitation. Holmes tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as he gauged the rhythm of the approach. The faint scuff of a heel against stone, a deliberate pause, then another step. Whoever advanced toward us knew we were there and did not fear discovery. I drew my revolver quietly from my pocket, feeling the familiar weight steady my nerves. Holmes, however, made no move to conceal himself. He stood in the half-light near the crate, perfectly still, waiting. Out of the mist-filled aisle emerged a tall man wrapped in a heavy coat, his hat drawn low. His features were obscured by shadow until he came within the dim glow of the gas lamp. Then I saw him clearly, a face of angular lines and weary intelligence, the mouth firm, the eyes coolly appraising. He regarded us as though we were unexpected but hardly unwelcome. "Mr. Holmes," he said in a smooth, unhurried voice, "I thought you might appear." Holmes's brow lifted slightly. "Indeed. Then we are already acquainted, though I cannot say I recall your name." The man removed his hat with deliberate grace. "March, Richard March. You may have heard it mentioned." "Ah." Holmes's tone carried quiet satisfaction. "The name on the consignment list, and I presume the husband of Mrs. Lydia March, formerly companion to Mrs. Harcourt. The circle closes, Watson." March's lips curved faintly. "Your deductions are as quick as their reputation suggests, but I would caution you against making too many. This matter is not as straightforward as you imagine." Holmes stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the man's. "A colonel lies dead. Mr. March." His final words warned of a whisper beneath the black lace, words which have now led us to this crate, bearing a symbol tied to a brotherhood of assassins. "You must forgive me if I find little room for ambiguity." March's gaze flicked toward the crate, and for the first time a shadow of unease crossed his face. "You do not understand, Holmes. That symbol, it is a warning, not an allegiance. The colonel uncovered something that should have been left buried. I tried to stop him." Holmes' voice was quiet but precise. "You mean to say you were protecting him?" "Yes, and his wife. The Brotherhood of the Serpent was never truly destroyed. They exist still, hidden beneath the guise of commerce and charity. When Harcourt returned from India, he brought with him a relic they wanted. He thought it a curio, a harmless idol. But it was more than that. It contained a cipher, one that could expose their London operations. They demanded its return. He refused, and so they killed him," Holmes said softly. March's hands tightened at his sides. "They would have killed her as well. That is why I sent her the lace." I exchanged a glance with Holmes. "You sent it?" I asked in disbelief. "Then you are the author of the message." "Yes, the letter sealed with ashes was my doing. The ashes concealed the chemical I used for the invisible writing. I warned her to flee to destroy all trace of the idol, but she hesitated. Perhaps she thought the colonel's death had satisfied them. She was wrong." Holmes's tone sharpened. "Then you knew this consignment was coming." "I did. I arranged for it to be intercepted. But I did not expect company at the docks." The tension in the air thickened. Holmes studied him closely, weighing every word, every gesture. "Then, Mr. March, you will not object if I examine the contents of this crate?" March hesitated. "I would advise against it." Holmes smiled faintly. "Advice is a service I value but seldom follow." With that, he drew a small knife from his pocket and pressed it against the wax seal. The crack of breaking resin echoed through the empty warehouse. I half expected a cry of protest, but March merely stepped back, his expression unreadable. Holmes lifted the lid carefully. Inside, wrapped in layers of burlap and straw, was a small chest of dark wood, its surface inlaid with tarnished silver. Upon the lid was carved the same serpent emblem, but more intricately wrought, coiling around an oval recess in the center. Holmes touched the recess lightly. "It once held a stone," he murmured. "An emerald, perhaps, or something more unusual. Whatever was mounted here has been removed." March nodded grimly. "The heart of the idol. Without it, the cipher is incomplete. The stone bears the second half of the code. That is why they will come for it, and for anyone who stands in their way." Holmes straightened, his expression tightening into resolve. "Then we must ensure they find neither." He replaced the lid and turned sharply toward the sound of a new disturbance, the sharp slam of a distant door. The warehouse's long aisles magnified the echo until it seemed to come from every direction at once. Holmes signaled me silently, and we took cover behind a stack of crates. March crouched beside us, his eyes darting toward the shadowed entrance. Through the drifting fog that crept in from the river, I saw movement. 3 figures, dark and silent, gliding between the rows like wraiths. "They're here," March whispered. "The Brotherhood." Holmes's hand went to his revolver, but his voice remained calm. "Watson, aim low. These men prefer knives to bullets." The first figure advanced swiftly, the glint of steel catching the light. Holmes waited until he was nearly upon us, then struck out with lightning speed, his revolver barrel smashing against the attacker's wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor. I fired once, the shot echoing through the hall, and another man cried out, retreating into shadow. March moved with unexpected precision, hurling a crate hook that struck the third man squarely across the shoulder, sending him sprawling. The fight lasted scarcely half a minute, but it left the air charged with the acrid scent of gunpowder and fear. When silence fell again, the intruders were gone, vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the echo of their retreating boots. Holmes holstered his revolver, his expression grave. "They will return," he said quietly, "and next time they will not flee empty-handed." March stood breathing heavily, his face pale beneath the lamplight. "Then we must destroy the relic before they find it." Holmes shook his head. "No, Mr. March, that is precisely what they expect. Instead, we shall let them believe they have succeeded." He turned to me with that unmistakable gleam of cunning in his eye. "Watson, we are going to prepare a little performance for our friends, a false delivery, a vanished idol, and a trail that leads them very far from London indeed." March looked doubtful. "You intend to deceive the Brotherhood?" Holmes's smile was thin and cold. "I intend to make them chase their own shadow until they vanish into it. But first, Mr. March, you must tell me, who among them leads this operation in London?" March hesitated for a long moment before answering, his voice low. "They call him the Vicar. No one knows his true name. But he moves among the city's elite, bankers, scholars, collectors, those who hide corruption behind civility. If you find him, Holmes, you will find the serpent's head." Holmes's eyes gleamed like flint. "Then, my dear Watson, our hunt has only begun." The following morning dawned grey and restless, as though the fog itself had not yet made peace with the light. Holmes and I returned to Baker Street shortly after sunrise, our boots still damp from the river mist, and the events of the previous night pressing heavily upon us. Holmes had scarcely spoken during the cab ride, his gaze distant, fingers steepled beneath his chin in that familiar posture of intense thought. I knew better than to interrupt him when his mind was engaged in one of its intricate constructions. Once inside, he went immediately to his chemical table and began preparing a curious series of mixtures, one producing a faint violet vapor, another a dull metallic sheen. He worked with a kind of controlled ferocity, the movements of his long fingers as precise as a clockmaker's. I watched in silence for some minutes before daring to speak. "Holmes," I ventured at last, "may I ask what you're concocting there?" He did not lift his eyes. "Thorough deception, my dear Watson, one which must be convincing to both the eye and the mind. You see, our friends of the Brotherhood will not rest until they believe the relic destroyed. I intend to give them a most persuasive illusion." He poured one solution into another, and the mixture hissed faintly, releasing a faint scent of sulfur and burnt sugar. "A simple compound," he murmured, "that when ignited will produce a residue indistinguishable from charred wood and ash. Our false idol, so to speak, shall perish most convincingly." I nodded, understanding his intent. "Then you mean to make them believe we have burned the chest?" "Precisely. But to make the illusion perfect, I must also stage the circumstances under which they believe it was done. That, Watson, requires a touch of theatricality." He turned sharply and reached for his violin, playing a short, discordant phrase while pacing the floor. "The Vicar," he said at last, "is our next step. March's description suggests a man of considerable education, one who moves freely among the upper echelons of London society. The name itself, the Vicar, is an affectation, likely used to insinuate moral authority. Yet beneath the guise of piety, he directs a network of extortion and murder." I leaned forward in my chair. "But how do you propose to find him in a city the size of London?" Holmes smiled faintly. "We will not find him, Watson. He will find us. The Brotherhood will soon learn that the crate from the docks was intercepted. They will seek to recover it, and when they do, they will believe the relic lies in our possession. That knowledge will bring the Vicar out of his sanctum." He paused and glanced toward the window, where the morning light struggled to pierce the fog. By this evening, word of our acquisition will reach him through the usual channels. I have already taken the liberty of ensuring that certain ears at the shipping company are indiscreet. I could not suppress a smile. You mean you bribed someone? Holmes waved his hand dismissively. Bribery is such a crude term, Watson. Let us call it the exchange of information for the sake of clarity. As he spoke, Mrs. Hudson entered with the Morning Post. Among the usual correspondence, Holmes's keen eye fell upon a single envelope of thick ivory paper, unmarked except for a small black wax seal. He broke it open with his penknife, unfolded the letter, and read silently. His expression did not change, yet I saw the faint tightening at the corners of his mouth. "Well?" I asked. Holmes handed it to me. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost clerical. "Mr. Holmes, your curiosity has already drawn you into matters beyond your understanding. If you value your safety, and that of your companion, deliver the chest to St. Benedict's Church, Clerkenwell, by midnight. Place it upon the altar, and leave without looking back. Failure to comply will ensure the silence of all who meddle." The vicar I looked up from the letter, chilled despite the fire's warmth. "So he knows already." "Indeed," Holmes replied softly, "which means our message has been received. The serpent shows its head at last." He paced for several moments, the letter dangling loosely between his fingers. "Watson, note the precision of his language. Deliver the chest, not the relic. He assumes the two are one and the same. That assumption is our advantage. We shall comply with his request, in our own fashion." "You mean to go to Clerkenwell?" "Of course. But the chest we deliver will not contain what he expects. The genuine relic will be elsewhere, secured for now, in a place where neither thieves nor priests may find it." He crossed to the writing desk and began drafting a brief note to March. "Our ally must play his part as well. I require him to remain hidden until further notice. The less he knows of our movements, the better. Knowledge can be extracted, but ignorance properly placed is armor." By dusk all was prepared. Holmes had disguised the chest with the precision of a stage illusionist, a replica of the relic, carved hastily from oak and scorched with the compound he had created earlier. The result was so convincing that even I, knowing the truth, would have sworn it genuine. At 11 o'clock we left Baker Street in a hired cab, the false chest resting between us under a heavy tarpaulin. The streets were unusually still, the air thick with that peculiar hush that precedes fog. The lamps burned dimly, their halos smudged with moisture, and the city seemed to hold its breath. When we reached Clerkenwell, the Church of St. Benedict loomed out of the mist, a squat, weather-stained structure, half hidden behind a wrought iron fence. Its great door stood ajar as though expecting us. Holmes dismissed the cab and we entered quietly. Inside, the nave was shrouded in shadow, the faint glow of a few votive candles flickering along the aisle. The smell of wax and damp stone hung heavy in the air. Holmes gestured for silence and approached the altar. He placed the chest gently upon it, then withdrew a small matchbox from his pocket. With a single strike, he ignited the chemical compound, and at once a column of violet smoke rose, curling like ghostly ribbons toward the rafters. The chest blackened, cracked, and collapsed inward upon itself, leaving behind a heap of smouldering ash. "The illusion," Holmes whispered, "is complete." We turned to leave, but before we could reach the door, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Mr. Holmes," it said, calm and resonant, carrying with it the measured cadence of the pulpit. "You are punctual. I confess I expected arrogance to make you late." A figure stepped into the candlelight, tall and severe, dressed entirely in black. A clerical collar gleamed at his throat, and in his hand he held a silver-headed cane that glinted like a blade. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, regarded Holmes with something like cold amusement. "The vicar, I presume," Holmes said evenly. The man inclined his head slightly. "You presume correctly, and you have done precisely as I asked. Almost." He glanced at the ashes upon the altar and smiled faintly. "You think yourself clever. You believe you have destroyed what cannot be destroyed. But there are ways, Mr. Holmes, in which ashes still speak." Holmes's gaze was unreadable, but I could see the faint tightening of his jaw. "Then perhaps, sir, you will enlighten me as to what they whisper." The vicar's smile deepened. "Only this, that one cannot burn away a curse, nor silence a whisper already spoken." And as he spoke, I felt a chill ripple through the still air, For somewhere within the church, beneath the stones, beneath the black lace of shadow itself, there came a faint, almost inaudible sound. A whisper. For an instant neither Holmes nor I spoke. The whisper seemed to slither through the dim church like a current of air that bore thought instead of sound. Faint, almost human, yet too soft and shapeless to be words. The flicker of the candles quivered in answer, as though disturbed by an unseen movement. The vicar, standing calm and upright before the altar, regarded us with the tranquil malice of a man who has planned the moment of another's disquiet. Holmes's voice, when it came, was low but steady. "A trick of acoustics, Watson," he murmured. "Nothing more than wind coursing through the stone vents." The vicar smiled as though he had heard the remark. "You may comfort yourself with science, Mr. Holmes. It will not serve you long. You have seen the serpent's ashes, yet you cannot comprehend what it consumes." Holmes stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "I comprehend perfectly well that you are the architect of a murderous fraternity, a blasphemer cloaked in sanctity, and a liar who mistakes theatricality for power." The vicar's composure never faltered. "And you," he replied smoothly, "are the meddler who believes the mind can master what the soul refuses to see. But your intellect, sir, is a fragile instrument in a world built upon older designs." Holmes regarded him for a moment longer, then said coldly, "Your sermons weary me." He turned as though to leave, but in that instant the vicar's hand flicked sharply toward the altar. From the shadows behind it, two men emerged, faces masked, movements swift. I barely had time to raise my revolver before Holmes shouted, "Down, Watson!" and flung himself aside. The report of my shot echoed through the nave, shattering one of the tall stained-glass panes, and moonlight spilled in across the floor in broken color. One of the masked men fell, clutching his shoulder, but the other lunged forward with a curved blade gleaming in his grasp. Holmes met him head-on, twisting his wrist with such precision that the weapon clattered to the stones. In the next instant, he drove the man back with a blow that sent him sprawling across a pew. The vicar, unmoved, raised his cane and struck the ground once. The remaining assailant, wounded but conscious, scrambled to his feet and fled into the shadows. The echo of retreating boots faded toward the vestry. Holmes aimed his revolver, but the vicar raised a single finger. "Violence, Mr. Holmes, will only quicken what you cannot prevent," he said. "The whisper has begun. You have merely hastened it." Holmes' expression hardened. "If that whisper reaches another ear, I promise you it will be your last." The vicar's response was a faint, knowing smile. "Then you had best guard your own." He turned, retreating into the darkness beyond the altar, and within seconds he was gone, swallowed by the labyrinthine passages that ran beneath the church. Holmes stood perfectly still for several moments, listening, then holstered his weapon and approached the smoldering remains of the chest. "Watson," he said quietly, "bring me that lantern." I obeyed, though my hand trembled slightly. Holmes knelt and stirred the ashes with a metal rod. Among the blackened fragments, something caught the light. A sliver of glass or crystal, half melted yet still intact. Holmes lifted it carefully between thumb and forefinger. "Observe," he murmured. "Our illusion appears to have yielded an unplanned truth." The fragment, no larger than a coin, was etched with minuscule lines forming a pattern almost too delicate to see. Holmes held it near the lantern, turning it slowly. "It seems," he said, "that the vicar's superstition conceals a cipher more intricate than I anticipated. These markings are not decorative, they are coordinates. But to what?" He slipped the fragment into his pocket and rose swiftly. "We must leave this place. The police will be drawn by the gunfire, and I have no intention of providing Lestrade the satisfaction of claiming I've desecrated a church." We departed through the side door, the fog outside thick as wool. Once in the open air, Holmes walked briskly without speaking, his coat drawn close and his eyes bright with the feverish gleam I had seen only when his mind worked at the highest pitch. At last he spoke almost to himself. "Coordinates imply location, numbers, and direction, but these are arranged upon concentric arcs. Not a map, then, but a mechanism." "A mechanism?" I repeated. "Precisely. Imagine a device, one half contained within the relic, the other perhaps within the stone march described, each engraved with lines that, when aligned, reveal a design or instruction. It was never a cipher written in ink. It was one forged in matter itself. We reached Baker Street near dawn, the city still half asleep beneath its veil of mist. Holmes wasted no time in setting the fragment beneath his microscope. I watched as he adjusted the lens with delicate precision. A few minutes passed in silence before he spoke again, this time with a strange note of excitement. "Watson, this fragment bears an inscription in Sanskrit, minute but legible under magnification. It references Nagara Sutra, the sleeping serpent beneath the temple of glass." I frowned. "And what on earth does that mean?" Holmes looked up from the lens, his eyes alight. "It means, my dear Watson, that our serpent has roots far older than we presumed. This brotherhood did not merely adopt an ancient symbol, they guard an ancient secret. Temple of Glass, surely a poetic description, but one that may refer to a modern location, perhaps a conservatory or even a museum." He rose and began pacing again. "London's Natural History Museum contains an Eastern relic collection, overseen by one Sir Alaric Weatherby. His name, coincidentally, appeared in the Colonel's correspondence 2 months before his death. I suspect Sir Alaric's scholarly interests extend beyond the purely academic." Before I could reply, a knock came at the door, sharp, hurried. Holmes froze mid-step, exchanged a glance with me, then gestured for silence. He drew his revolver and motioned me toward the wall. "At this hour, only one of two things knocks upon Baker Street, Watson: desperation or death." He opened the door swiftly. Standing upon the threshold was Lady Eugenia Harcourt, her face pale as parchment, her eyes wide with terror. She clutched a black lace veil in her trembling hands. "Mr. Holmes," she gasped, "they've taken him." Holmes stepped forward. "Whom do you mean, madam?" "Mr. March," she whispered. "He sent word to meet me at dawn near the river. But when I arrived, there were signs of a struggle, blood on the stones, and this—" She held out the veil. It was pinned to the wall with his knife. Beneath it, something written in ash. Holmes took the veil gently, his expression darkening as he examined it. The faint smudges upon the lace formed a single phrase, scarcely legible. He read it aloud: "The serpent wakes." For several heartbeats there was silence. Holmes folded the veil carefully, his eyes fixed on the fireplace where the embers glowed faintly red. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but edged with steel. "So the vicar makes his move," he said. "Watson, the game has shifted. The Brotherhood no longer guards its secret. They intend to use it. And if March lives, his only hope lies where the serpent sleeps." He turned toward me, his expression composed but his eyes fierce with purpose. "We go to Weatherby's museum at once. There, beneath his glass domes and scholarly pretensions, I suspect we shall find not the relic, but the serpent itself." The carriage rattled through the mist-veiled streets toward South Kensington, the faint glimmer of dawn just beginning to dilute the darkness. Lady Eugenia sat opposite us, her trembling hands clutched tightly around the edge of her cloak. The terror in her eyes was not the fragile kind born of sudden shock. It was the hollow dread of one who has glimpsed something unspeakable and knows it is not yet finished with her. Holmes sat beside her, motionless save for the rhythmic tapping of his fingers upon his knee, his gaze fixed on the window as though the fog outside might conceal the shape of an idea he was waiting to emerge. At last, he spoke. "Lady Eugenia, you said the words written in ash were found near the river beside signs of a struggle." "Yes," she whispered. "The embankment behind the old granaries. I followed the note he sent. It said only, 'The vicar is moving tonight.' I have proof. But when I arrived, there was no one, only blood, the veil, and those dreadful words. I feared it was his." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "And did anyone see you arrive or depart?" "No, it was scarcely dawn, and the fog so thick I could hardly see the water." Holmes nodded again, his expression unreadable. "Then it is possible March lives. If the Brotherhood took him, they would not kill him outright, not before ensuring his silence serves their purpose. They require him for something, or someone else does." He turned to me. "Watson, you recall the pattern etched into the fragment, the concentric arcs?" "Perfectly. Then imagine it magnified, transposed upon the layout of London itself, the serpent beneath the city. Its coils would touch certain sites of antiquity, churches built upon Roman foundations, temples buried beneath streets. The Natural History Museum, with its glass vaults, stands directly above one of the oldest." "The so-called Temple of Mithras," I started. "Then you believe the vicar intends to use the museum as a facade, to access something buried below?" Holmes smiled faintly. "I do not believe, Watson. I am nearly certain. The Brotherhood's rituals were never for mere theatrics. They were reenactments, designed to awaken what they call the sleeping serpent. Whether metaphor or device, they require proximity to their origin. The temple lies beneath Weatherby's domain, and I have no doubt he is complicit. The carriage drew up before the museum, a vast silhouette of arches and domes rising like a palace of glass and stone. Its windows caught the first rays of the morning sun, gleaming with deceptive serenity. Few were abroad at that hour. The great doors stood closed, but light flickered faintly from within. Holmes dismissed the driver and led us toward a side entrance, producing from his pocket a small brass instrument, one of his own contrivances. Within moments, the lock yielded with a soft click. We entered silently. The echo of our footsteps on the marble floor was the only sound. The galleries stretched away into gloom, filled with the spectral shapes of skeletons, glass cases, and relics from forgotten ages. Holmes moved with swift precision, every sense alert, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. "Watson," he murmured, "observe that light beyond the eastern hall. It seems our quarry keeps early hours." We crept closer until voices reached us, one low and measured, the other hoarse with agitation. Peering around a pillar, we saw Sir Alaric Weatherby standing before a large display case. His normally immaculate attire was disordered, his face pale and glistening. Opposite him, cloaked in dark vestments, stood the vicar. Between them lay an object upon a velvet cloth, a stone disc, carved with the same sinuous markings as the fragment Holmes had found. Weatherby's voice trembled. "You promised no one would be harmed. I only wanted the discovery preserved, its knowledge, not its worship." The vicar's response was a whisper, smooth and cold. "Knowledge and worship are the same when one knows the truth, Sir Alaric. You have served the serpent. Now you will watch it breathe." He reached out and pressed his hand to the disc. A faint pulse of crimson light flickered across its surface, illuminating the carved lines, as though fire ran through them. I heard Lady Eugenia stifle a cry. Holmes seized my arm before I could move. "Not yet," he breathed. "We must see how far this madness goes." The vicar turned toward a sealed panel at the rear of the hall, a section of the floor marked by an iron ring. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pulled it upward, revealing a stairway descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was damp and heavy, carrying with it a strange metallic scent. "Bring the disc," he ordered. Weatherby hesitated, but fear overcame conscience and he obeyed. They descended into the shadows, the faint light fading as the door fell shut behind them. Holmes waited only a moment longer before moving. "Come, Watson." "Lady Eugenia, remain here. If we do not return within the hour, go to Scotland Yard and demand Inspector Lestrade himself. Tell him the Brotherhood of the Serpent is within these walls." We followed down the narrow stair, revolvers drawn. The air grew colder with each step, and the sound of our descent echoed strangely, as though the stone itself carried whispers. At last we reached a vast chamber lit by torches and electric lamps. Its walls were carved with ancient symbols, the floor dominated by a great circular platform of polished stone, upon which lay March, bound and motionless. The vicar stood before him. The stone disc now set into a socket at the platform's center. Its crimson light pulsed faster, in rhythm with some deep, unseen vibration beneath the floor. "Release him," Holmes commanded. Stepping into the open, the vicar turned slowly, his expression one of dark satisfaction. "Ah, Mr. Holmes, you are punctual. The serpent wakes, as foretold." Holmes's revolver did not waver. "Your serpent is a mechanism, not a god. I have seen enough of your illusions to know their foundation in chemistry and deceit." "Then you will witness the last illusion," the vicar said softly, and pressed his hand to the disc. The vibration became a tremor. The platform shifted, revealing beneath it a hollow chamber filled with intricate machinery, gears, glass tubes, and conduits glowing faintly with the same red light. Steam hissed from hidden vents. Holmes' eyes gleamed with fierce curiosity. "An electromechanical conduit. By heaven, Watson, it's ingenious." But before he could move closer, Weatherby suddenly broke from the vicar's side, shouting, "Enough! You will not destroy it." He lunged forward, striking at the disc. There was a blinding flash. Light and sound exploded together, and the chamber shook violently. When the smoke cleared, the vicar was gone. Weatherby lay collapsed beside the platform, his face ghostly white but still breathing. Holmes rushed to March, cutting his bonds. "He lives," he said, relieved, though heaven knows for how long. I looked toward the shattered mechanism. The crimson glow had vanished, leaving only the faint hiss of dying steam. Holmes examined it briefly, his expression grave. The Brotherhood's work was not divine, Watson. It was scientific. They sought to channel energy through mineral and magnetism, creating resonance that mimicked life, a monstrous experiment cloaked in mysticism. As we helped March to his feet, a faint laugh echoed through the tunnels, cold and distant. Holmes froze. "The vicar," I whispered. Holmes' eyes darkened. "Yes, he lives. And somewhere in this city, he carries the other half of the serpent." He turned toward the stair. "Come, this is not an ending, Watson. It is only the coil tightening." By the time we emerged from the subterranean passage, the morning fog had thickened once again, rolling over the city like a living veil. The faint hum of awakening London drifted to us, carriages rumbling, vendors calling. But all seemed distant, muted beneath the weight of what we had just witnessed. Holmes, his coat dusted with ash from the explosion, paused upon the museum steps. His sharp eyes, usually glittering with energy, were clouded with calculation. I knew that look well. It meant the case had not ended, but evolved into something far deeper than even he had anticipated. Lady Eugenia rushed toward us as we stepped into the grey light. Her expression, when she saw March leaning upon my arm, shifted from fear to relief and then to confusion at the pallor of his face. Holmes raised a hand gently to forestall her questions. "He is alive," Holmes said evenly, "but he has been through an ordeal that may haunt him for years. The Brotherhood's influence runs deeper than any of us suspected." March stirred weakly. "He took it, Holmes." "The other half." "The serpent's heart." Holmes crouched beside him. "Describe it." March's eyes fluttered open. He seemed to speak from a fog of pain. "A smaller disc, same design, but reversed. It fit into the first like two halves of a mirror. He said when they meet again, the serpent shall awaken fully." Holmes's gaze hardened. "Then this vicar intends to rebuild the device and complete whatever design the Brotherhood began." We escorted March and Lady Eugenia back to Baker Street, where Mrs. Hudson's alarmed fussing over our soot-stained appearances provided, for a fleeting moment, a reminder of ordinary life. But once March was settled and given brandy, Holmes turned to the window, the morning light cutting across his profile as he spoke, half to himself. "There is a rhythm to madness, Watson. It does not act in chaos, it imitates purpose. The vicar is no mere fanatic. He knows exactly what he pursues, and he cloaks his science in theology to disguise his intellect. Such men are far more dangerous than fools." I could not help glancing toward March, whose trembling hands still clutched the remnants of his note. And what purpose could such a man serve save destruction? Holmes smiled faintly. "Ah, Watson, there are many forms of destruction. Some seek to ruin lives, others to rewrite truth itself. If my theory holds, the vicar intends both." He turned abruptly from the window, the animation returning to his face. "We must anticipate his next move. If the Brotherhood's rights depended on proximity to the old temple, the second half of the device must relate to another site of equal antiquity, one hidden beneath the fabric of London's history. Hand me the survey maps, if you please." For the next hour I watched him work with furious precision, overlaying ancient maps atop the current city grid, drawing circles and lines with a quill. He muttered intermittently, names of forgotten churches and long-demolished crypts flowing from his lips like a litany. Finally, his pen froze above a single point. "Watson," he said softly, "do you recall St. Martin's Well? That disused chapel buried beneath Clerkenwell, sealed since the cholera outbreak of '53. Yes, an underground chapel converted into catacombs, if memory serves. Surely long abandoned? Precisely. And yet," Holmes said, tapping the map, "it lies along the same arc connecting the two halves of the serpent's path. If the Brotherhood seeks to awaken their mechanism, the convergence must occur there. The vicar will attempt his ritual tonight, before the authorities can piece together what happened at the museum." I felt a chill. "You mean to confront him there?" "I mean," Holmes replied with a grim smile, "to close the serpent's coil once and for all." By dusk we were on our way, the fog returning to shroud the streets in damp mystery. Holmes had sent word to Lestrade, though he did not expect the yard to arrive swiftly. "They will come when it is safe," he remarked wryly as we descended into Clerkenwell. "That is their habit. Ours, fortunately, is less patient. The entrance to St. Martin's Well was hidden behind a derelict stone wall, half swallowed by ivy. Holmes produced a lantern and forced open the rusted gate, the hinges groaning like the breath of some ancient creature. The air beyond was thick with decay and the faint tang of river water. We moved cautiously down the steps, our lanterns throwing trembling circles of light upon the crumbling masonry. After a long descent, the passage opened into a vast crypt. What light remained flickered over an altar at its center, and upon it the unmistakable figure of the vicar, robed in black, his hands poised above the joined discs now set within a metal frame. The crimson glow had returned brighter than before, illuminating the vaulted ceiling with eerie light. Holmes raised his revolver. "Step away from that device." The vicar did not turn. His voice carried with unnatural calm. "Mr. Holmes, you arrive as ever at the moment ordained for you. You may stop the mechanism, but you cannot unmake the truth it reveals." Holmes's tone was cool and cutting. "You speak of truth as though it were your creation, yet all I see is delusion built upon stolen science and a murdered conscience." At that, the vicar turned, his eyes alight with an almost feverish glow. "You of all men should understand the pursuit of knowledge beyond the reach of ordinary minds. This is not faith, Holmes. It is revelation through power. These stones are not relics. They are conduits to the energies buried beneath this city, to forces that once shaped empires." Holmes advanced, his revolver unwavering. "And you believe yourself chosen to wield them?" "How typical." The vicar's smile widened. "Not chosen, proven. You cannot stop it now." The serpent breathes. A sudden vibration ran through the floor, followed by a deep hum that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat. The crimson light flared, and the machinery beneath the altar began to stir. Wheels turning, pistons moving with slow, inexorable precision. Holmes glanced at me sharply. "Watson, the lever on the far side. Quickly, before the current completes the circuit." I ran, the heat searing my face as the light intensified. The vicar shouted something indistinct, and a gunshot rang out, the bullet striking the stone beside me. I dove forward, grasped the iron lever, and pulled with all my strength. There was a blinding flash, then darkness. When I came to, the hum had ceased. The air was thick with smoke, and I could just make out Holmes kneeling beside the shattered remnants of the device. The vicar lay sprawled across the stones, his hand outstretched toward the ruined discs. Holmes touched his neck and shook his head. "He is gone. The serpent sleeps again." I rose unsteadily. "And the Brotherhood?" "Scattered," Holmes said quietly. "Without their priest, they will dissolve like ash in the wind. Yet mark my words, Watson, another will rise, for folly never dies where intellect strays from conscience." He rose, dusted off his coat, and looked toward the faint light filtering through a broken grate above. "Come, my dear fellow. The night has ended, and I am in need of tobacco and silence." As we climbed back into the fog-shrouded streets, I glanced at Holmes. His expression was unreadable, but I fancied there was a shadow behind his eyes, a trace of something more than mere victory. Perhaps for once, even he had stared too long into the abyss of reason. He noticed my gaze and gave a faint smile. "Watson, if ever I grow as mad as the men I pursue, you have my leave to strike me down." "You do yourself injustice," I replied. "Perhaps," he murmured, adjusting his collar as we turned toward Baker Street. "But then, my friend, the line between reason and madness is drawn by those who dare to look and those who dare not." And as we walked beneath the paling light of dawn, the city stirred once more, its secrets buried anew beneath the cobblestones, waiting, perhaps, for the next whisper beneath the black lace. The streets of London were beginning to awaken when Holmes and I reached Baker Street once more. The familiar rattle of carriages and the distant cry of newspaper boys drifted through the morning fog, yet both seemed strangely subdued after the chaos we had witnessed beneath Clerkenwell. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door, her expression anxious, but Holmes offered her only a brief reassurance before sinking into his armchair by the fire. His pallor was pronounced, the faint sheen of exhaustion on his brow revealing just how much the ordeal had cost him. For several minutes, he sat in silence, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. Then, in that deliberate tone that always signaled the return of his composure, he said, "Watson, you will note that the most dangerous villains are not those who act from greed or hatred, but those who act from conviction. The vicar was a man who mistook knowledge for divinity. I took my usual seat opposite him, and yet, Holmes, I cannot help feeling that this affair was unlike any other we have faced. There was a strange undercurrent to it all, a sense that we were but touching the surface of something older and far more complex. Holmes gave a short, quiet laugh. Precisely, my dear fellow. The true serpent was not the machine nor its architect. It was the idea that men may bend mystery to their will without consequence. The Brotherhood cloaked their pursuit in ritual and superstition, yet at its heart was science, misused and misunderstood. Their downfall was inevitable. He leaned forward, selecting his pipe from the mantel and lighting it with a flicker of his match. You recall no doubt the peculiar resonance we felt in that chamber, the vibration beneath our feet. That was not the voice of any serpent, Watson. It was a subterranean energy conduit, part of an abandoned experiment from the early days of electrical engineering. The Brotherhood must have stumbled upon the remains of it and constructed their entire mythology around what they could not comprehend. But what of the vicar? I asked. He seemed to know far more than the others. His understanding went beyond faith. Holmes exhaled a thin stream of smoke. Indeed. My suspicion is that he was once an engineer or scholar before fanaticism claimed him. There are men who, when their intellect collides with despair, seek meaning in delusion. He built a church out of ruin and called it Revelation. We sat quietly after that, the rhythmic ticking of the clock filling the room. Outside, the fog thickened once more, dimming the morning light. Then came a hesitant knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson appeared with a card upon a tray. Holmes took it, his brows rising as he read. Lady Eugenia March, he murmured. The affair is not yet quite done with us, it seems. Moments later she entered, veiled still but with a composure restored since we had last seen her. Her eyes, though red from sleeplessness, carried a look of resolve. Holmes rose courteously. Lady Eugenia, he greeted, you have our sympathy for all that has occurred. Mr. March is recovering, I trust? Yes, she replied softly. He is weak but safe. Yet I have come because this morning I received another letter. Holmes' expression sharpened. Another? She handed him an envelope of pale grey parchment. The seal was broken, its wax blackened as if by soot. Inside, written in an elegant slanted hand, were but 6 words. The serpent sleeps but not alone. Holmes studied it for a long moment, then handed it to me. The handwriting was precise, almost calligraphic, and bore none of the tremor or haste one might expect from a man fleeing the law. It cannot be from the vicar, I said. We saw him die. Holmes' eyes narrowed. We saw him fall, Watson. Death, as you know, is not always so obedient to appearance. He began pacing, the familiar spark of energy rekindling in him. Consider. The explosion destroyed the apparatus, but not the entire chamber. There were passages leading elsewhere, perhaps an escape route known only to him. The letter's phrasing is deliberate, not alone. It implies a successor or an acolyte. Lady Eugenia's composure faltered. You mean it is not over? Holmes paused, meeting her gaze with quiet gravity. In truth, Lady Eugenia, nothing of consequence ever ends, it merely transforms. But fear not. Whoever sent this wishes to remind us that the serpent still stirs, and by doing so they have revealed their position upon the board. He turned abruptly to me. Watson, fetch the ash-covered fragment we retrieved from the temple floor. I did so. Holmes held it beneath the lamplight, examining its scorched surface. The pattern upon it, those faint, coiling lines, still glimmered faintly with residue from the explosion. He compared it to the signature on the note, then smiled with grim satisfaction. Observe the curvature of the S and the downward sweep of the pen here, at the end of the word alone, identical to the engraving upon the serpent's fragment. Our correspondent is none other than the architect who forged the discs. The vicar may have been his instrument, but the true designer remains unseen. Lady Eugenia caught her breath. Then there is another? Undoubtedly, and more methodical than the last, Holmes said. The vicar's death may have been convenient to him, a means of severing loose threads. But by sending this letter, he has committed an error. Pride, you see, is the most faithful herald of exposure. Holmes folded the note carefully and tucked it into his case. Watson, we shall send a telegram to Lestrade at once. I expect his men to watch all known associates of the late Sir Alaric Weatherby. The Brotherhood's outer circle must still be in communication. Lady Eugenia stood. Then you mean to pursue this further? Holmes inclined his head slightly. To leave the serpent half slain, my lady, would be to invite it to grow new heads. When she departed, the house fell silent again, save for the faint crackle of the fire. Holmes resumed his seat, his expression unreadable. I could see the exhaustion tugging at him, yet his mind was already miles ahead, weaving possibilities. After some time, he spoke softly. "There is a curious irony, Watson. We have spent the night extinguishing a flame of madness, only to find its embers carefully preserved. I fancy that before this year is through, we shall again cross paths with the author of that letter. You believe he will reveal himself?" "He must," Holmes said. "Men such as he cannot bear to remain unseen. They crave recognition as a miser craves gold. When he strikes again, and he will, it will not be in shadows but in spectacle." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "Until then, let us take what rest we can. The mind, like the serpent, must sleep before it coils again." I watched him for a long moment, as the fog pressed against the window, the lamps of Baker Street glowing faintly beyond. I thought of the vicar's words echoing through the crypt, of the crimson light pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the earth, and of Holmes's unwavering calm amidst it all. It occurred to me then that London itself was much like Holmes, vast, mysterious, and filled with secrets that only the bravest dared to uncover. As the clock chimed the hour, Holmes stirred slightly and murmured, half-dreaming, "Watson, should another whisper reach you, sealed in ash or silence, wake me." And so the case of the whisper beneath the black lace ended as it began, not with the clang of finality, but with the quiet promise of more shadows yet to come, waiting patiently beneath the streets of London for Sherlock Holmes to find them once more. The storm had waned into a thin drizzle, tapping faintly against the windows as dawn crept over London. The gaslight flickered low in Baker Street, throwing long shadows across the carpet where Holmes stood motionless before the fireplace, pipe clenched between his fingers, the faint aroma of tobacco curling into the air. The firelight caught the gleam in his eyes, that peculiar brilliance which always came before the final unraveling of a mystery. Watson sat across from him, hands folded, waiting with the restrained patience he had come to master over years of their friendship. Between them lay the evidence: the torn letter from Lady Durnham's writing desk, the peculiar brass key from the locked garden gate, and the photograph of the late Lord Durnham, whose ghost, it seemed, had haunted the case from the very beginning. Holmes finally spoke, his tone calm yet electric with purpose. "My dear Watson, do you recall the small puncture upon the inner lining of Lady Durnham's glove?" Watson nodded. "Yes, though I confess it seemed a trivial detail at the time." "Triviality, my dear fellow," Holmes murmured, "is the false face behind which truth so often hides. That puncture was caused not by accident, but by a slender needle, a needle dipped in digitalis, the very substance that claimed her husband's life. The poison was delivered slowly, subtly, until the heart faltered. It was murder by patience and an art, if one can call it that." Watson leaned forward, startled. "You mean she poisoned her own husband?" Holmes turned to him sharply, eyes narrowing. "No, Watson. She was the intended victim. The true culprit is none other than her trusted confidant, Mr. Leighton, the man who appeared most devoted to her cause. You will recall how he spoke of loyalty and loss with such theatrical sorrow. His emotion was genuine enough, for it was born of guilt." Watson's brow furrowed. "But how could you be certain?" "Certainty," Holmes replied, "is the privilege of logic pursued to its limit. When Lady Durnham's dog perished after drinking from her glass, the household dismissed it as accident. I, however, took note of the faint smell of crushed leaves, foxglove to be precise. Then there was the matter of Leighton's handwriting. The anonymous letter that arrived, warning her of imminent danger, was written with his peculiar slant, a trick of the wrist that even disguise cannot conceal." Holmes moved toward the mantel, picking up the small brass key. "And here lies the final proof. This key was said to open the garden gate, yet it fits another lock entirely, the drawer of Lady Durnham's escritoire, where the poisoned letters were kept. Leighton used it to retrieve the final missive before its delivery could expose him." Watson exhaled, the magnitude of the revelation dawning upon him. "Good heavens, Holmes! So the very man who sought to protect her was the architect of her ruin." "Precisely," Holmes said softly. He had gambled his fortune upon the Durham estates, and when her husband's will named her sole beneficiary, he saw only one path to redemption: to wed her, once widowed. But the lady's heart, alas, belonged elsewhere. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of tragedy. Holmes's gaze softened as he turned toward the window, where the first light of morning filtered through the thinning mist. It is one of those curious ironies of fate, Watson, that love, when twisted by ambition, becomes the deadliest motive of all. Watson rose slowly, his voice low. And Lady Durham, does she know the truth? She will by now, Holmes replied. Inspector Lestrade has the man in custody. I sent a note ahead with the details. Justice, though belated, will not fail her. He paused, tamping the ashes from his pipe. It is seldom that crime proceeds without flaw. Even the cleverest hands leave traces for those who care to see them. Holmes paced back to his chair, his expression thoughtful. You see, Watson, there was a moment, a single instant, when the entire mystery stood revealed. It came when Lady Durham spoke of her husband's dying words, "The garden will keep my secret." I understood then that the garden was no metaphor but a literal clue. Beneath the rose bushes lay the remains of the letters he had burned, the ones that proved Leighton's manipulation of the will. The roses, nourished by deceit, bloomed all the brighter. Watson regarded his friend with a mixture of awe and melancholy. You never cease to astonish me, Holmes, yet I confess it is a bitter victory, one shadowed by human frailty. Holmes allowed himself a faint smile. We are all to some degree the instruments of our own undoing. Even the criminal mind, which prides itself upon subtlety, cannot escape the laws of cause and consequence. The clock on the mantel struck 8. The day had begun in earnest. From the street below came the sound of carriage wheels and the distant hum of the waking city. Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. Another case concluded, and another fragment of the great human puzzle laid bare. Tell me, Watson, do you find yourself weary of such pursuits? Watson smiled faintly. Not while you lead them, Holmes. Holmes inclined his head with quiet amusement. Then let us hope the world remains as full of folly as it is of mystery. He rose, crossing to the window once more. The fog had lifted entirely, revealing the pale blue of morning sky. For a long moment he stood there in silence, his silhouette framed against the light. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "The truth, Watson, is rarely comfortable, but it is always necessary." And as the city stirred below, the great detective of Baker Street turned away from the fading shadows of another solved enigma, ready, as ever, for whatever new riddle the restless world would bring to his door.